Thank you all for joining us in our next installment of our Forward in Energy Forum. My name is Scott Williams. I work as the Research and Education Coordinator for the Wisconsin Energy Institute at UW-Madison. We're so glad so many of you are joining us today virtually. If this is your first time joining us for one of our events, we hold the Forward in Energy Forum on a monthly basis. And it's hosted by the Wisconsin Energy Institute, which is our mission is to provide leadership on campus for multidisciplinary research, education, and outreach efforts that accelerate the world's transition to clean energy systems and solutions. And so this forum series, the Forward in Energy Forum, is part of our efforts to cultivate public understanding of energy issues. And we do this on a monthly basis to bring together experts on and off campus to discuss the many dimensions of our global transition to cleaner energy systems. And our goal is to encourage cross-disciplinary dialogue to explore the important technical, social, political, and economic dimensions of a wide variety of clean technology innovations and issues. And for this month's panel discussion, as we see signs that this pandemic is coming under control, maybe sometime this year, attention will be turning to how to rebuild the economy and create jobs that this pandemic has caused after this pandemic has caused so much economic hardship. So many advocates and even the current presidential administration is pointing to investment in clean energy as an opportunity to rebuild the economy and to create more jobs. And so we'll hear from our distinguished panelists today to talk about what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, where do we see things going, and how do we ensure that we bring along everyone, that we don't leave folks who either used to be part of the fossil fuel economy or folks who are underrepresented in clean energy jobs previously. A few announcements before we launch into today's forum. In 2 weeks, about 2 weeks on April 7th, we're holding a special webinar online panel discussion titled Solve Climate by 2030. And this is part of an initiative to spark classroom dialogues about climate solutions in each state and in many countries around the globe. This is hosted by the global dialogue is hosted by the Bard Center for Environmental Policy, and the Wisconsin Energy Institute is the host for the Wisconsin statewide event. You can see we've got a great lineup of speakers from around the state for this event, including Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. And we'll be talking about near-term climate actions for the state of Wisconsin. And then second, instead of our usual Forward in Energy panel discussion, toward the end of April, we'll be doing a climate solutions workshop. This is something that we did last April. And it's an interactive workshop that's led by me and my colleague, Allison Bender, at the Wisconsin Energy Institute. Using a simulation software called En-ROADS, where users can test different global actions and see how they contribute to meeting our climate targets. So if you're really into kind of interactive software and want to help contribute to and see what the different actions can lead to for global climate change, then I encourage you to attend that event on April 20th. And then third, I would like to acknowledge that the land that the Wisconsin Energy Institute occupies, as well as all of UW-Madison, is the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk people, who have called this land Dejope since time immemorial. The Ho-Chunk Nation and the 11 other First Nations residing in the boundaries of present-day Wisconsin remain vibrant and strong. We recognize and respect the inherent sovereignty of the 12 First Nations that reside in the boundaries of the state of Wisconsin, and also want to acknowledge the tribal nations that are doing some of the most important and leading work in transitioning toward clean energy and just energy systems. And a couple of logistical notes. You can see the chat is in, people are posting in the chat, and you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. If you'd like to ask a question, please do so in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address those questions throughout the program. You may also see live captioning, which is turned on for accessibility. If you do find this too distracting, you have the option to change that in Zooms to turn it off for yourself. Now I'll turn it over to our moderator. To moderate this session, we are pleased to have Dr. Ken Walls from Madison Area Technical College. Dr. Walls is a science and engineering instructor and renewable energy program director at Madison College. He is also the director of the Center for Renewable Energy Advanced Technical education, or CREATE. And the CREATE Center's goal is to advance the field of renewable energy by supporting two-year college renewable energy programs across the country. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here today. And thanks also to Allison in the Wisconsin Energy Institute for organizing today's conversation on the discussion of clean energy jobs and the recovery. I'm looking forward to it. It's my pleasure to moderate, and I'm joined by our esteemed panelists, Sarah Konzemius of Illume Advising, Ellen Barless of the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, and Larry Williams Jr. from the Sierra Club. And I will ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, let me just address a few other mechanics here. Each of our panelists have been provided ahead of time with a short list of questions that we'll use in the first part of our session to frame today's conversation. And that discussion will then be followed with additional time for questions and answers from the audience. As Scott mentioned, you have access to both the chat and the Q&A window. And I'll do my best as the moderator to monitor those questions and then digest and present them to our speakers at the end of their prepared remarks. I should also mention that participants can upvote questions that you find particularly relevant. And those that receive the most votes, I will try to prioritize for the time that we have available. So with those instructions taken care of, let me ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And why don't we begin with Sarah, followed by Ellen, and then Larry.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I am Sarah Konzemius. I'm one of the co-founders of Illume Advising, and we are a research and strategy consulting firm based in Madison, Wisconsin. We have a team of about 35 professional consultants all over the country, and we primarily work with utilities on their energy efficiency and clean energy programs. Our work is squarely focused in the research space, and much of what we do is help utilities better understand their customers, what will engage and drive their customers, and how to serve their customers in the context of energy efficiency and clean energy, both transition, programs and services, et cetera. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you, Ellen.
Hi, I'm Ellen Barless, and I'm the Solar Workforce Manager for the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, or MREA, in Custer, Wisconsin. Our organization has spearheaded a project called the Solar Corps, which is an initiative to engage technical and community college students from all over the Midwest to join the solar workforce. And I work on that project, among other things, to encourage students in two-year colleges to join the solar industry. And thank you for having me too.
Welcome, Ellen. Larry?
Hi, I want to also extend that thank you to Ken and Allison. This is going to be a great conversation, I already know. As mentioned, I'm Larry Williams Jr. I am the labor coordinator for the Sierra Club Labor and Economic Justice Program. Sierra Club is the largest environmental organization in the United States. But my role primarily has been based around building relationships between organized labor, so labor unions, worker organizations, and environmental organizations, as well as community and EJ groups. So my work primarily centers around the concept of just transition. And hopefully we'll get into that a little bit in this conversation. Thanks again for this opportunity.
Well, thanks to each of you for those introductions. It's an honor to speak with our panel today, and I see we've got quite a few participants online, so I think we're well prepped for a good conversation here. So why don't we dig right into our topic? The first question for our panel is what are the trends happening in both the legacy fossil fuel and clean energy industries, and what might an equitable energy transition look like? And Larry, if you don't mind, maybe I'll direct that first to you, and then we can have Sarah and Ellen comment further.
Sure thing. So the first thing I think about when I hear uh, legacy fossil fuel is to think about how workers are being impacted. What are the trends that are impacting workers? I think there's a rising consciousness around the average worker about how fossil fuels are impacting their personal health as well as the health of the communities in which they work. So there's been a lot of work and conversation happening between groups like the Blue Green Alliance, the Labor Network for Sustainability, but also other environmental organizations that are trying to be more involved in workers' rights issues and discussing the fact that these industries, sometimes by no fault of their own, but just by economic changes, are failing. So coal, for example, is a declining industry that no amount of support is necessarily going to bring it back, regardless of whatever political conversation is happening. And so the question is, what happens to those workers? The term just transition itself is credited to a gentleman from the oil, atomic, and chemical workers who originally created the idea of the super fund and thinking about what can we do to create a fund to help those workers, quote, transition from an industry at that time that was very dangerous, the nuclear industry, to something that allows them to live a life with sustainable wages and benefits and things like that, but also doesn't necessarily impact the health of the community and those workers. So I think that concept has evolved. I can't wait to hear how other folks on the panel think of just transition, but that concept has evolved, and in some ways it's it means different things to different movements. So for the environmental movement, we might be talking about a transition to clean energy. For workers, sometimes the only thing they hear when they hear just transition is fancy funeral, like I'm going to lose my job and we're going to get a little bit of money on the way out the door. So I try to be very careful in the way that I use it in the different spaces that I'm in and understand there are different types of conversation. Then in terms of the clean energy industry, pardon, clean energy industry, say that 10 times. What I've seen is, we're at a real nexus point right now. What I mean is, we're talking about a change in the very makeup of the economy. The Biden administration, we'll talk about this later, but the Biden administration, I think, just put up the idea of a $1.9 trillion infrastructure plan, which is amazing, right? It's very bold. But just like when we transition from the horse and carriage to the automobile, there can be unintended consequences, meaning that we can create an industry that is once again based on the inequality of exploited labor. So I think that we're at a point where we need to start thinking about, if we're going to be increasing these opportunities for workers in clean energy, how are we going to create those jobs? Are they going to be family sustaining careers, or are they going to be one-off kind of gig economy type of work? We need to think about that.
Sarah or Ellen, your thoughts on fossil fuels and clean energy industries and an equitable energy transition?
Sure, I'll jump in. First, sort of related to the equitable energy transition, one of the things that we've been thinking about and we have to sort of keep in mind as the clean energy industry grows is that it's growing within an energy ecosystem that has historically been pretty inequitable, that have had a lot of victims of generation. That means we are going to really need to actively work to make sure that the clean energy industry isn't sort of replicating those same challenges or injustices that have existed in the past. And it's going to, it probably goes without saying, but it's going to take us being very active, right? Like we can't just presume because it's clean energy, because it has all these benefits, that it's the right thing to do, that it's inherently going to be more just unless we make it a priority to make that transition just. So, it doesn't give you the answer of what it looks like other than we're going to have to do the work. It's definitely not going to be something that just happens because it is clean energy. I mentioned in my introduction that a lot of the folks I work with are utility staff who are leading energy efficiency initiatives. They're leading electrification projects, EV projects, sort of in that side of the house, so to speak. And, a couple of things that I just thought in terms of trends and your question there, we're seeing a lot of our utilities that we work with looking to reframe their investments, and in particular in energy efficiency programs, as sort of economic development or job creation programs. People, are probably familiar with FEJA in Illinois, which really puts a lot of job development, makes job and economic development a part of the sort of energy efficiency conversation there. The state of New Jersey also just rolled out their first statewide energy efficiency programs, and they have framed it as a jobs program, and not just a jobs program, but an equitable jobs program that the people being hired need to represent the population of New Jersey, that jobs need to be centered in areas that have been more hard hit, that have suffered more economic impact of not just the last year, but the last years and or decades in some cases. So, that's something that we're seeing. Lot of emphasis on how we can more effectively serve low to moderate income customers, underserved communities, partnerships within the communities, which is in some ways can feel new for utilities who are still trying to transition from that space of like, we're the guy, you have to use us, to how do we work within our communities? How do we offer programs and services that people choose to participate in? You can't just come in and tell us what for now. How do we collaborate and work collectively? So seeing a lot of that. I could probably keep going on. It's a gambit though, in terms of like where utilities are. We have some that are really, forward thinking, kind of looking at what's going on in New Jersey and some of the work being done in New York, in Illinois. We also have places like Wisconsin, where for just the first time, I've been doing efficiency work for 20 plus years, a lot of it in Wisconsin. And the commission just recently said, you have to look and make sure you're proportionally serving customers, like you're equitably serving customers. And they didn't even come up with sort of a, here's why you need to do it. It's just like, keep track of it, report. Are you serving customers that equally in the state, and asking for tracking in terms of that. And so we're really, it is a gambit in terms of where sort of the legacy fossil fuel providers are on this. But I would also say that it's been kind of an exciting year to see how fast some of them have been willing to push, given it's an industry that typically has been really slow to move, slow to transition, and slow to respond to change. So I would view that as a positive.
So Ellen, you've got your finger on the pulse of the clean energy half of this question. Your perspective.
I think that it all starts with training, Ken. And that's really I work in the world of training. The MREA's function in the world is about training. And I think that that's really where this is coming from. And I just wanted to mention, I had read a really interesting report today. It was by the Rocky Mountain Institute. It's a 3-part plan for the transition to clean energy. And one of the main concepts in that plan is financing. The question of how are we going to pay for this? And that's not something I hear a ton of. And it's an interesting idea about how utility scale power is going to transition over into clean energy from a financial perspective. And I think that that's something that, is going to come to the forefront. And I also wanted to agree with Sarah and Larry that I think that there has to be a plan. And the good news is that I've noticed more and more as I've traveled around my world of training and technical school programs and just that world of burgeoning people coming into this industry. And I don't mean just solar, I mean the whole clean energy movement, that, it's definitely on the top end of people's consciousness, and the planning for that is going to be the key, though.
Well, I think that the conversation there really kind of frames the discussion. I'm both encouraged and also recognize the challenge ahead of us. But, 50, 75 years ago, when we built those first coal plants, this was not a conversation that anybody was having. So just the fact that we've got 50 some people on the call today to discuss this topic, I think is a sign of the progress that's been made in the last half century. Why don't we go on to our second question? And before I pose that one, let me just remind folks that the Q&A window there is available if you want to post questions for our speakers or upvote anybody else's question, and I'll monitor and gather those for folks. So our question number 2 was, how has the COVID-19 pandemic altered the energy sector, and how might any of the priorities of the new Biden administration impact the clean energy industry? And why don't we start with Sarah with this one?
Sure. So, by all estimates, there were about 3.4 million clean energy jobs in the country, and we lost about 500,000 of them over the last year due to the pandemic. A lot of it was, from our perspective, a lot of where we saw that loss was in weatherization, folks providing in-home retrofit services, especially through utility program, or that were really dependent on utility programming, because utilities obviously were reticent to have people going into homes until we, really understood what was going on and how we could mitigate the transfer of COVID-19. So the industry, did take a hit in the last year, and it's growing, as we all know. So had a loss of jobs, and then also a lot of need for jobs. So it will, I think it's going to create an interesting next couple of years for the space from that perspective. On the utility side, one of the things that we've seen as a big impact of COVID-19, and I think I alluded to this in my opening, was really this interest and much more activity around connecting energy benefits to things like health, and looking for ways to partner with providers of public health services to make sure that the dollars utilities are spending or investing in communities can go farther and help those in most need. One of the things that we're seeing is an interest in looking at how to better make and measure the links between energy efficiency and clean energy and public health benefits, occupant health benefits, local employment outcomes. Part of the reason they're doing that is so that they can, be better positioned to receive public support and regulatory support for programs, funding for more programs. But as I said, before too, it's kind of all over the map in terms of how far along utilities are on this progression, but definitely something that had not seen much before. There was sort of talk on the side about, health benefits and those types of things in terms of cost effectiveness. Can we use it to make programs, to put into that analysis to make more programs cost effective? And now it's more about can we measure this, collect the data on it so that we can really help everybody understand the benefits of energy efficiency and clean energy programming outside of sort of megawatt hours, which isn't all that compelling to most people. We're also seeing, as I said before, a lot of interest in low to moderate income programs, or ensuring customers are being served equally and with equity, which is not something we've really seen in the past. There was not a lot of concerted effort to understand who's been served and are we equally serving people based on their investment in the programs. Typically, if you are a ratepayer, you're paying in, but hadn't seen a lot of work being done to make sure that those returns were coming back to people in an equitable manner. And so that's something else that we're seeing more of on the utility side. I'll kind of, briefly touch on the second part of that question, which was on the Biden administration. And admittedly, I'm not the expert on that, but one of the things we're watching closely is the Justice 40 initiative. And I think what was referred to earlier, but 40% of the benefits, and that is a really key word, that word benefits, from federal climate action needing to go to disadvantaged communities, energy efficiency, public transit, affordable and sustainable housing efforts. And this is modeled after the New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which they've been working on that for quite some time in New York. And I think that's a great start, but it's going to take a lot of work to get it right. As we've talked about, it's going to be a lot of work, and defining benefits is going to be a little complicated. And so we're kind of in a place where we're curious to see how that plays out. But there are, when you think about benefits, and if the administration is sort of framing this around benefits, you really have to decide how you're defining that. And, you can, if you define it as boundaried areas, we know there are people outside of those boundaried areas who are also underserved and who need those benefits. If you define it as individuals, how do you reach them? How do you make sure you're getting to the right individuals? So there's a lot of complications around it. And I think the administration has given the departments like 120 days to figure this out. And we know, for example, in New York, they've spent the last year just kind of trying to define who are the customers they're going to serve under this guidance. So, a lot going on there. It's exciting. It's exciting to be having these conversations, but certainly there's a lot of work to be done in prioritizing and getting it right.
Yeah, certainly. So Larry, I know you've spent a fair amount of time looking at policy coming out of Washington, D.C. What are your thoughts on the pandemic and maybe new initiatives from the Biden administration?
Yeah, policy is something you definitely can't escape in DC, whether you want to or not, right? But the beautiful thing is that I got to deal with the real America as well. Talking to workers, being in the labor movement, it keeps you grounded in reality and recognizing that policy should be rooted in the lives of regular Americans. Because if it's not changing someone's life, then it's not helping anyone really, right? It's just lining somebody's pocket. So in that spirit, I think the answer to the second part of that question, which is more what I can answer, is in terms of the priorities of the Biden administration, I think first and foremost, the PRO Act, which strengthens the rights of workers to collectively bargain and organize. If this does pass, this would be the most robust update to labor rights since 1935 Labor Relations Act. I think a lot of folks are actually going to be really surprised with the Biden administration, because already with the stimulus bill, it was a pretty straight up rebuke of the kind of laissez-faire economics of the last, 40, 50 years, the Milton Friedman-esque, and I think the infrastructure bill as well. It's just like saying, not only do we want to fix roads and bridges, but we want to make sure that, while we're working on the infrastructure, folks are having a family sustaining wage doing it. So I think the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of, I don't know if this is what emboldened the Biden administration, but to me, the Biden-Harris administration is acting in a way that is recognizing that the average American is really hurting, and they're moving quickly. They're giving a direct response to that pain, and they're doing it through policy. So I couldn't be more excited. I know it's a wait and see thing, and you don't know exactly what they're going to accomplish, but so far, so good.
So Ellen, I know you work quite a bit with schools and other educational providers, and COVID has kind of been a whirlwind for that sector. You want to share with us some of your observations from the past year and sort of what you see forthcoming?
Yeah, COVID really, and Ken, you teach in a technical college, and so you could speak to this as well as I could, but the whole basis of technical and community college education is hands-on learning. And it's, I will never forget one of the technical college instructors said to me, it's hard to teach welding through a Zoom call. And, that kind of says the whole thing. It was really hard on the instructors, really difficult for the students. It has taken months and months to sort of recover from that. And, I heard a technical college instructor say the other day that across the board, technical college enrollment is down about 15% across the state of Wisconsin. All that being said, we're seeing lots of signs of life in the programs. Some of the programs that I work with that are established, we've got programs that are full with waiting lists, and there's tons of interest in renewable energy programs all across the Midwest. So, to answer the question, it was not a good effect. The good news is that as we're coming out of it, I think we're going to see lots of renewed interest. And to answer the other part of the question just a little bit, the hope is that we're going to see lots of good funding for two-year education from the Biden administration. All signs are pointing that way, and that's really helpful to get those students into seats and into the labs and then out into the workforce.
So sort of sticking with the theme of workforce prep, Ellen, what are some of the biggest challenges that employers face in recruiting and training for the clean energy workforce?
You know, I think the biggest challenges are in the arena of training. And, you know, I started working for the MREA, almost 2 years ago, specifically under a grant from the Department of Energy to develop an internship program and this project called the Solar Core. And our goal is and was to unite 2-year colleges across the Midwest to provide training with renewable energy. And what we've found is that there are programs that are fully developed that have been in existence for many years and have been training students successfully. And then we're finding that there are more and more colleges that are kind of stepping up to the plate now to offer their first course in energy efficiency, building efficiency, solar PV, all over the board. And the challenge is going to be trying to standardize that training somewhat and get the students to the employers. And what we're seeing right now is that the employers are in desperate need of workers, and the students are, in obviously pursuit of jobs. And it's really the problem of connecting the dots, because we're building an infrastructure right now. We don't have that infrastructure that you have in a gas utility program or a plumbing apprenticeship program. And so what's happening is we have contractors who are so busy, they don't have time to answer their own phones. And they're also trying to build infrastructure to bring new employees on board. And it's really challenging. And that's kind of what I do, is kind of connect the dots. And we've established a great new website. We've had lots of interest from employers, tons of interest from technical and community colleges. And it's just a matter of building that infrastructure.
Yeah, I think I can say from our perspective, we've heard a similar sort of commentary from employers on our industry advisory board, where it's hard for them to even staff their human resources offices because they're so busy. It's all hands on deck, just executing projects that are already in the queue.
Yeah. And that really has been the biggest challenge from my point of view, is that, we have no lack of work and we're training the workers, but it's building those pathways to get the students to the workers or to the companies.
Sarah, I think you wanted to add something.
I did. I just wanted to comment too. I mean, I feel that pain as an employer in this space. It's been very hard to find people and hire. And we have in the last year, but I think, one of the things that, and I actually noticed there was a question on this, sort of this underrepresentation in the energy industry, I think in general, the clean energy industry, definitely in the energy efficiency industry. It is not a diverse workforce. And, that's something our organization has been really trying to think through, and how do we start to make sure that there is sort of representation and diversity in this workforce that's delivering on these clean energy imperatives and getting the benefit of these jobs and economic development. And this is not the best answer, but one of the things we keep running into is sort of trust that this industry is real. People, this is not a known entity in a lot of ways. And, people are making decisions that affect the rest of their lives. And one of the, some feedback that we've heard recently is really like, people have to trust that this industry is real, that these jobs are real. You have, most people don't know that there's an energy efficiency industry. So then how do you go out and recruit people and create opportunity and sort of diversify the people delivering on this? So I think that's another, the infrastructure, is going to be really hard. And I'm glad that's not my job. But there is this trust piece too, that we have to really help all see that these are real opportunities that can benefit all. And, it's a challenge when you have an industry that doesn't necessarily look like you coming out and telling you that, hey, this is for real, you should come do this thing, it's clean energy. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that this lives up to the promise of lives up to the promise.
Yeah, I think that is one of the challenges, being sort of an emerging growth area. We have this conversation with students in our program all the time. If they're interested in becoming a nurse or a police officer or a teacher, they've got all kinds of examples of probably friends and family members that have worked in those professions, and there's a pretty well-established career pathway. And it's easy to see how you can pursue a career in those areas. It's not nearly as clear for something like solar energy installer or wind energy technician, because they're just newer jobs. They haven't been around as long, and there haven't been as many people employed in those fields to serve as role models for students. And I think that is definitely a challenge.
And we haven't built the apprenticeship programs, or, there are all kinds of other areas of infrastructure that are built for the careers that you're talking about and many others. And because it's so new, and like I said, the problem is that trying to leave that building up to a bunch of people who are so busy just trying to get panels on a roof or trying to do energy audits or whatever it is, it's really difficult.
So I want to sort of return to the theme of equitable participation in this economy, and I see we are getting some upvotes on the one question we had related to this. Larry, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the societal benefits to growth in clean energy, and what can be done to ensure that these benefits are equitably shared across communities.
Right. I think I've been really just enjoying listening to this conversation and taking some notes for myself. I know we're viewed as, the experts in this conversation, but fellow panelists, I really enjoy hearing about the challenges that you're facing in practicality. I think the reality is that the benefits are not automatic, right? And since we're building the plane as we're flying it, a lot of times we have conversations about equity and justice, but we talk about it as an add-on or an attachment, as opposed to making sure that it flows through everything that we do. So what I mean by that is, as we're building this new industry, this new economy, every piece that we build, we should say, okay, how would this affect the Black and Brown community, a trans community, a community of female workers who have traditionally been overlooked or kept out? Looking really closely at those numbers and saying, okay, 6.6%, wow. We know that historically, Black and Brown communities have been targeted for high arrest rates. However, when it comes to employment, you're coming out of prison and now you're being blocked out of doing the same work that you were doing when you were in prison. For example, making solar panels. There's a company that one of our researchers identified had actually commissioned work to be done on solar panels in prison. Now, do people know that when they're buying it? Absolutely not. And do they know that when those workers come out of prison, they're most likely going to be locked out of that industry? Probably not. Or the fact that the workers for that clean energy company are not making very good wages. So I think there's some real economic concerns that the clean energy industry has around what if our labor is unionized? What if, our workers are making X amount of money? Can we meet the business demands, right? And I think it's our job, especially if this is, government funded type of work, that there should be not only funding set aside for these types of concerns, right, to pay for good labor, but also thinking about people like Elon Musk. A lot of people love Elon Musk, but nobody looks at the fact that he gets paid hundreds of millions of dollars by the government to do this work, right? Right? But then his workers are always constantly trying to organize, and they're getting shot down or fired and going through all this abuse in the process. So I just think there's a difference between the billionaire Elon Musk and a small clean energy company, but they're operating in the same industry. So making the playing field equal for those smaller companies and those minority-owned companies and women-owned companies, and being very cognizant of the challenges of those folks who are trying to get those jobs, who may need more help in a project, like in a pre-apprenticeship program, whether it be substance abuse training, support and things like that. like the Art Shanks facility in California did for its workers. There's so many things that you need to think of in terms of equity. I think involving those communities in the conversation is really important.
I think that that kind of transitions to our next question, which was, Sarah, can you maybe take this one and just address the opportunity for the clean energy sector to address income inequality and wealth gaps that we see?
Well, I can take it in a very thin slice, and then I hope my co-panelists will jump in as well. So, again, from that energy efficiency perspective, we know that BIPOC communities have been, significantly underrepresented in places where critical decisions are made regarding energy infrastructure. We have to be more strategic and geographic in how we implement energy efficiency programs. We need to be sure access and participation is equitable, and that needs to be a metric in program success. These programs are often measured by how much did they save and how much did they spend. And we need to see metrics in measuring program success against participation. If we look at who's participated in these programs historically, just they have skewed towards, white middle upper class homeowners who are not disproportionately affected by energy generation or suffering from energy burden. So, one of the ways to address this is that making sure that I'm getting ahead of myself. So, one of the things we can do through energy efficiency is making sure it's getting to the people who are suffering from a disproportionate energy burden so that they have more, cash available for other costs. We know that people who are that low and moderate income customers are often putting much more of their household income towards energy costs than those who are not low and moderate income. So that's a very simple way that we can make sure that customers are not disproportionately burdened by energy costs by making sure buildings are more efficient, homes are more efficient. The low to moderate income households have a higher energy burden than their more well-to-do counterparts. A bigger share of their income goes to basic energy needs. Those costs are higher when people live in low income housing that isn't efficient. And, bringing housing up to energy efficiency levels, sort of the average US home, could put more money in people's pockets. So I'm sort of really approaching it from like a usage perspective versus, this like, how can we address this through jobs? But there is a way to start to address that gap by making sure that those who are low and moderate income aren't disproportionately putting the income they have towards energy costs when compared to other people. The other thing is, as I said, is just making sure that as that clean energy industry grows, that we're really being intentional about intentional about making sure that it is benefiting everybody in a way that is equitable. And again, I'm just it's kind of the worst person, right? Like I'm announcing something we should do, but not telling us how to do it. But the fact that we're having the conversation is so critical. And the fact that we see states, we see utilities really thinking about how to make sure what they're putting forward is providing better opportunity and more equitable opportunity is a huge first step. I never would have thought we'd be having these conversations even a few years ago. So that's sort of the optimism in me. It's going to take a lot, but I think we're seeing it, and I'm excited about that. So I'll let others answer this because I know there's probably more opinions than mine to share here.
Yeah, I think sort of two key takeaways for the participants here today is, just your observation, Sarah, that in the past, we never even measured data for this. And as Larry's comment was, we just assumed the benefits would be automatic. And,
yeah.
and that is no way to actually achieve the sort of outcomes that we're talking about. So just having this conversation today, I think advances us far beyond where we would have been even a decade ago.
And I'll tell you, there's some work to be done because we have a utility who I won't name who basically said, like, we need to figure out how to measure some of these benefits without doing anything that we are not approved by our commission to do. You know, they're still pretty hamstrung. So we have utilities who really want to figure this out, but they're working under this regulatory environment that hasn't really seen the benefit of counting these other benefits yet. And so they're not supposed to spend that money on it. So, you know, I share that story as like a positive, right? Like there are people trying to figure it out, even in an under the radar way, because they see how critical it is. And, you know, then the hope is we can go forward and say, like, look at all these benefits and start to get some of these more conservative commissions maybe to go like, okay, yeah, let's value that. Let's let you do that. This is a worthy investment. So it's kind of a fun time to get to be a little sneaky sometimes too.
Yeah, I think it's pretty telling that our legacy systems and processes really weren't set up to address this question, right? And that's clearly a space where I think everybody agrees that policy needs to change. The question is how do you do it going forward? Larry, I want to return to this question around organized labor, because we've gotten some questions about that in the chat box and a few upvotes there. And can you maybe comment on the role for organized labor and trade union workers in the clean energy industry?
Sure. And, you know, I think folks like myself who've spent their life working with organized labor, you know, we don't want to just see things through a rose-colored lens, right? The labor movement, just like most movements in the United States that have been around over 100 years, have some history of exclusion. And when it comes to, you know, building trades and construction, it's similar. You know, it's majority male, it's majority white, and it can be also just straight up like folks who are very familiar to each other, you know, familial. So folks who are a generation of workers who come from a particular geography, who are, you know, doing this work, who don't necessarily live in the community. I think Sarah had pointed that out, is that honestly, frankly, a lot of times, if you look at the work that's done in these cities, and somewhere like Detroit, the labor is coming from outside of the city. And, you know, that's not always directly attributable to racism. Sometimes it's that the labor union, for example, could have a local that's in the suburbs, but that's an equity issue. You know, if you have people in the inner city who can't make it out there for training or don't have a license or whatever it may be. And I think, you know, before you talk about the role of organized labor, you have to look at the challenges. And I see the challenges as the labor movement needs to kind of re-envision itself. You know, so do you want to always be the, you know, the coal union, for example, that represent coal miners, or do you want to evolve yourself to understand there's a new industry emerging? And I also understand, you know, I'm coming from a predominantly white environmental organization that has a mixed history with Native folks and with, you know, the co-worker community. But in that lane, I say, for the labor movement itself, and this is happening in some corners. You're seeing utility workers, the plumbers and pipe fitters. I mean, they're reimagining how they can who they can represent, how they can represent them. But I think saying, okay, here's a new industry in clean energy. Here's a new industry that will require a different set of skills that could be transferable, and that we want to create careers as opposed to just jobs. Something that I can take this skill and is transferable to multiple projects. And, you know, in that evolution, it needs to make an appeal to a new generation of workers and young folks who would never even think of themselves as being in a long-term job, because, you know, folks under 30 tend to change jobs every single week. If the clean energy industry, not to diss, you know, younger folks, but like we don't get that benefit of staying somewhere for 15 years, right? And I've stayed at jobs for 7 years and people think I'm crazy, but I think I'm just trying to make the point that I think that the clean energy industry in general, to use that term, it wants labor that's going to be delivering the best work, that's reliable, and that is consistent. And to do that, you have to have a workforce that can evolve and grow with you. And so this is something where they need to think about the labor movement as an ally, because they have that built-in training, right? They have the apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship system. They have a real IBW. These unions have really good history with that stuff. But it's going to take thinking outside the box, like the Future Energy Jobs Act was a bill that was supported by EJ groups, the Sierra Club, faith groups, because they were doing anti-recidivism work, clean energy partners. And the idea was to create a pipeline that went through community colleges and brought folks through the labor training and then into the jobs. And these are, federally funded projects. So that type of stuff is few and far between now, but I think you can look at those things as a case study for what to do in the future.
Yeah, just thinking about those job switchers, we certainly see a lot of folks in that case at my technical college. A lot of the students that come through our doors are career changers. And one of the things that they look for is, if I reskill in this renewable energy field and, 5-10 years from now, things move, am I going to be able to transport those skills into another area? So that's a conversation we have all the time with students on our campus for sure. And maybe that's a good sort of transition over to you, Ellen, to talk a little bit more about, connecting students and job seekers with employers and how that talent pipeline kind of plays together.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And I noticed in the Q&A, somebody asked whether graduates of the Solar Corps can join a union. And the question is an interesting one, and the answer is yes and no. We have students that come through the Solar Corps that are from all kinds of different disciplines. So we have electricians who are getting solar training. We have students in HVAC programs who are taking solar courses within those programs. We have students who are doing full out 2-year associate's degrees in solar energy technology. And this is just a sign of what's happening in this industry, that, it's growing and it's changing and it's really emerging. And Sarah made that point that, I think that there are a lot of trust issues about that. Just like you said, Ken, many people who went through a 4-year college degree and then went back and they're getting an associate's degree in nursing because there are jobs there. And, is the renewable energy industry going to be like that or not? And I guess that's the big question. And so developing a talent pipeline, the biggest challenge is to build the pipeline first. And, I think that that's really where we are right now. And all of these conversations that we're having about organized labor and, about the standardization of curriculum and, those are the topics of conversation that we have. And so I think that's really what we're doing right now is we're building the pipeline. And certainly once the pipeline's built, the talent's going to come through it. Obviously, this isn't going away. And we're seeing the utility scale renewable energy projects scale up. We're seeing companies growing, grants are being written. It's all happening and it's happening quickly. And so on top of everything else, we have a lot of moving parts. So that's not a great answer, but it's the honest answer.
Well, thank you, Ellen. I think it's insightful for sure.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on the 1 hour mark, and I'd encourage all of our participants, if you have questions for our panelists, go ahead and start typing those in the Q&A box now. We've got one more question, prepared question for our panelists, and then we'll throw it open to questions from the audience. The last one is kind of open-ended, but I think it's the $1 million question. We'll let all our panelists try and take a crack at it. And that is, what is required to empower all of our community members to take an active role in the transition towards a clean energy economy? And Sarah, maybe we'll let you take the first swing.
Okay. It's a big question. I think a couple of things, and I'll take it from a couple different perspectives. Is, one, when we're talking about the community at large, just the general population, recognizing that in the past we've really framed the energy economy on sort of energy savings, dollars, climate, and I think we're not putting enough attention on metrics that are more meaningful to people, like health, like indoor air quality. These are things the public cares about more and is more compelling. So shifting those metrics and really making sure, as I said before, we're tracking and understanding the occupant health outcomes, fewer sick days, reductions in childhood asthma, those types of things that just are more compelling to people. I think that's going to help people be more interested in and be more involved. If we're talking specifically about solar, policies that make solar more accessible and affordable are going to be so important. Better integration into programs that are assisting those who have really long been left out of the benefits of renewable energy. So, how do we integrate this into weatherization assistance programs or LIHEAP programs? How can community solar projects play a role in this? How can we commit to push solar into those markets that have been excluded in the past? I think, a final thing I would just say in response to this is that, kind of outside of the general community, community members, as we think about what is the administration going to do, what can states and local governments do, is just really making sure that we understand who those communities are that need to be targeted, because they've historically been disproportionately burdened and excluded in the benefits of clean energy and energy efficiency. What resources can help people. And as I said before, I think the real trick is going to be, sort of defining that what is a benefit, and really making sure that we understand those benefits that we're chasing, and then making sure that those benefits are being considered in the context of how people have been, excluded in the past from the benefits of clean energy and energy efficiency.
Larry, you want to take a crack at the $1 million question? So what's required to empower all of our community members to take a role in the clean energy transition?
That was really well put, Sarah. Answer to that. I think I'll just add engagement. We talk about community benefits agreements and, involving the community at every step of the process. One of the most impactful things for me was being in, Nairobi, Kenya, and talking to organizers there on the ground, and then also working with folks in Lamu, where, most parts of Africa don't have the advanced coal operations and all these mines that we have here. South Africa being, I think, the major exception, and a few other exceptions, but they have the opposite problem where, like, now you have China and industry wanting to come in and build these mines and things, and they're seeing it through the lens of, oh, well, we deserve to have energy at the level that all these developed nations do, so why can't we build the coal mine, right? And you have really brilliant community members saying, you know what, our way of life is, we like it the way it is, and we don't necessarily want to be America, we don't want to be any of these other nations, and we see the problems that these fossil fuel extractions have already done to their community, right? They can't live off of the land, things like that. And so community involvement and the power of that, they were actually able to stop a coal mine from being built in Lamu. And I think that if they can do that, then, by community participation, then we can do what we need to do here. So, but we can only do that if we stop assuming that, we're in this industry, right? So we tend to assume that everybody already knows what clean energy is. We assume people know what just transition is. And we have to just kind of like start over and say, what's going on in your community right now? And what would you like it to look like? Okay, here's a thing that's happening. How, if it did come to your community, how would you want it to look? And what are the problems you would want to solve? I think starting the conversation from that place, not belittling folks and not making any assumptions, is the only way we're going to get them to buy into this idea of a clean energy future.
I like that answer of yours on the engagement front, because that also, I think, is what is going to be necessary to address those longstanding legacy policies, procedures, and systems that we have in place that need to change, right? Unless everybody is engaged and attuned and knowledgeable about those, it's so easy to just continue to perpetuate the inertia that's already in place, right?
Yep. You'll be surprised who showed up at the community meeting when they get the flyer.
Ellen, let's give you a crack at that last question. Empowering all community members to take an active role in the clean energy transition.
It's all about education, Ken. And, it's like Larry said, it's all about people being knowledgeable. And, it's amazing when you work in the world of discipline like renewable energy or clean energy, how much you assume that people know. And I am always amazed when I have a conversation, how easy it is to educate somebody just at a grassroots level about the clean energy transition and what's happening out there. And because I work in the world of education, or maybe I do work in the world of education because I believe in it, but I think it has to start from kindergarten on and, train people to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think that's the key to the whole kingdom.
Well, speaking as an educator, Ellen, I appreciate that sentiment.
The truth.
So we've had some questions coming in from our participants, and I encourage people to continue to post them in the Q&A. I want to take up one that we haven't talked much about yet so far, and that is how does trade and manufacturing play into the idea of a just energy transition? And I'll throw that out there to anyone that might want to field it.
I have a comment on that. And I see that's from Derek Figures, that he happens to be our new labor director, Sierra Club. I see him sneaking in the chat there. Welcome, Derek. I always thought that this kind of goes back to that idea that you have to look at historical inequity to think about what you're going to do in the future. So trade itself, as well as manufacturing, one of the main reasons why the Trump administration was so successful in the Rust Belt, Ohio, Pennsylvania, these states that have, a strong white working class tradition, is because a lot of those folks, frankly, are hardworking people who, come from that generation of having that job for 30, 40 years, being able to sustain your family and, do the work, and, you'll be rewarded for it. But that's completely changed in the economy. That's, I think, a part of the conversation that's been missed. A lot of times we go straight for the more controversial topics, but the reality is, because of outsourcing, which was a major trade decision that started happening in the 70s, decentralization and outsourcing, you have the hollowing out of these middle American towns. And a lot of these plants from places like Baltimore, where I live, but also the Rust Belt, being sent overseas, and then, people are working for 1/10 of the wage. And that work was never replaced. So when it comes to manufacturing, the idea, there's a chart that I usually show when I do just transition presentations, where it shows the trend of outsourcing going up and the manufacturing going down. And also, as the manufacturing decreased, so did the share of income going to the 99%, so to speak, and the share of income going to the 1% or 1/10 of a 1% increasing. So a lot of these concepts, I find them to be actually pretty simple when you look at them, but you're not going to see it looking at, I don't know, CNN or whatever, right? And so I just think that the policy as it's written in terms of trade and manufacturing need to be reflective of the everyday lives of people.
I kind of wonder if that might be something that we see taken up, reflecting back on our earlier question about initiatives coming out of Washington, D.C. and the Biden administration. Because he's been there long enough to also witness that outsourcing trend happen over his career in DC.
I think he gets it. I really do.
And you have to think that, you have to think people are pretty well attuned to that when you consider his background and where he came from. Sarah, I think you were getting ready to chime in there.
I was not.
I'm sorry.
I can chime in about a lot of things, but I was not there.
I misread your facial expression. Sorry. Let's see. Going back to our audience questions here. Let me just pull up another one of these here. So there was I think an easy question, Sarah, that I wanted to steer to you, which was about the engagement of HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning technicians, and how they're incorporated into the clean energy field and what role that sector has to play in the transition.
Sure. So is typically or often counted, and this kind of be the inexact science, right, of counting, but often the HVAC sector is sort of included in those clean energy jobs, especially from the perspective of energy efficiency and equipment upgrades. And also then in sort of this electrification transition, right? Like the HVAC industry is going to be critical in helping us electrify as a path forward. So certainly included, which I think is what the question was. And certainly one that is going to have to undergo some significant sort of mind shift and maybe training. If you think about a state like Wisconsin that is heavily, it is heated by natural gas, and if we are looking at a future that is electrified and getting to a point where we can start to transition, that's a significant shift for an industry that, to be honest, like when I started in this industry, we were like convincing them to get everyone on natural gas. We've come full circle. And so the HVAC industry obviously is going to be a critical piece of this, both from that beneficial electrification perspective, new technologies that are going to be needed to accommodate that in terms of, comfort with technologies that maybe haven't been used in certain parts of the country before, heat pumps and other options for homeowners as they're looking to electrify. So yeah, really important. I don't think I can say it any more clearly, and I'm not an expert beyond that, but certainly a part of that transition and a part of that count when we talk about jobs.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that trend, because I can remember when I was getting started in this field, we were training a lot of folks to replace electric hot water heaters with natural gas because it was cleaner and far, far cheaper. And now we're going right back to those same locations and encouraging people to do exactly the opposite.
Yeah, I hope they don't recognize me, right? Wait a minute, you got me to do this 15 years ago. Now you're telling me I need to go back.
Ellen, you mentioned that you work with some HVAC programs in your job with some solar technicians. Do you want to comment a little bit more on that?
Sure. We have a large and growing renewable energy program happening over at Chippewa Valley Technical College. And that program is rooted in their HVAC program. And so they're doing something pretty innovative. And that is that they're adding in solar to their existing HVAC program. And it's working out great. Some of the students are going through a standard HVAC curriculum, and they add solar in. And, at some point, I think the solar part of that will be standalone. But yeah, it's, it's really effective. They're doing that at Northeast Wisconsin Technical College as well. The students who go through their energy management technology program all do a fair amount of HVAC. And so the instructors from the HVAC program teach in the energy management technology program as well.
I think we should also probably just acknowledge that when we talk about solar technology, we're really should distinguish between two different technologies, one being photovoltaics or solar electricity, and the other being solar thermal technology or solar hot water technology, which has been around for a lot longer. That industry was pretty well established going all the way back into the 1970s. And still in some parts of the US, it's pretty well integrated into HVAC programs. If you go down to Florida where they're using solar for pool heating systems, for example, you can find schools and training organizations that have several experience integrating that technology into heating, ventilation, and air conditioning programs. Let me go back to another question from our audience here. And let me just scroll back. My screen advanced on me here. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions together here. How can we ensure that people of color, poor people, and indigenous people, folks that historically have not been very well engaged in the energy sector, can participate and maybe even be architects of the new energy system? And I'll throw that open to anybody who cares to take up the question.
Well, I will start, and it will be an incomplete answer, but kind of piggybacking on Ellen's comment earlier and Larry's comment earlier, is that we have to make sure that they're part of the discussion. We can't design a program absent input and involvement from the communities that we're trying to influence and impact and benefit. And so certainly that's a really key piece of it. I think we also have to be really direct about that being the goal. I think, it kind of in the context of benefiting from the clean energy economy, in the context of how do we diversify the workforce. There was a question earlier on about, 7.7%, the solar industry being 7.7% Black, while 13% of the US labor force. I think we have to be really direct about the need and the goal of making sure that we can make the solar industry workforce representative of the US labor force and who is in it. And we have to be really direct and bold about saying that we have to better serve communities, and we are working towards that. I think sometimes we use veiled language to try to say, oh, we're trying to get equity, we're trying to diversify. But I think we have to come out and say what we need to accomplish and be really clear about it. Because sometimes as the audience for that, I have a women-owned business, not quite the same, but you get this veiled language around how like, oh, we need diverse business enterprises to help serve our customers. And like, I think we need to come out and be much more direct about that. Women are underrepresented in this industry. People of color are underrepresented in this industry and in how they're served by this industry. So how do we fix it and again, use that direct language, engage the communities, and make sure that we're doing this in a way that really democratizes the benefits.
Well, and I think that that's true in terms of training too. And, the good news is that, as I was saying before, this industry is so growing right now, and companies are so in need of hands that I think it's an unbelievably good opportunity for us to forge a pathway in exactly what you're talking about, Sarah. There are community organizations all over this country that serve populations of people who can take training if the training is there for them to take, and to become educated about all facets of clean energy and the jobs that need to be filled in those capacities. And I really think that we're at a really great opportunity, because we are building infrastructure, we're building the pipeline. And so, I think that you're absolutely right, that if we're aware of it and it becomes a priority and it's part of the plan, it'll stick. And what a great time, to be doing that.
I do just want to acknowledge Sarah's point about having participation from both genders too. That is really important when we look at skilled trades, because we know historically women just haven't been represented there. I think when we look at the clean energy trades, that is one sort of bright spot for this industry, is that compared to a lot of other STEM disciplines, we actually do get stronger engagement of our female students in a lot of our technical college programs that are teaching things like solar or clean energy programs. That's not to say a lot of room for improvement, but I think compared to some of the historical patterns there, we've definitely seen an uptick in participation from female students, which is encouraging. Larry, I think you were getting ready to comment as well.
Yeah. I'll jump in and say something really quick. And I'm willing to bet the numbers are really low for trans folks as well. I don't know the numbers for sure, but just want to put that out there. I think that the person I want to just kind of shout out in this video is Jamez Staples, who started Renewable Energy Partners in Minnesota. He's an African-American gentleman who really wanted to bring the idea of clean energy to his community, and really sees that there's challenges there. And in particular, I mean, he's really tried to reach out to labor and, you know, has had various difficulties there. It's a very blue state in terms, or blue city. But again, you know, the entrenched kind of fashion in which some of this work has been done in the past can lead to difficulties for any group who's not from the existing group to try to get in. And so I think that there's a lot of women entrepreneurs and, you know, Native folks who, you know, not only do they face the, you know, typical challenges that you have from historical issues, but also there's like these institutional barriers that are usually invisible and that they're always trying to climb over. And I've watched Jamez, you know, fight for years to try to get to try to bring opportunities to people who, you know, people complain about the guys who are kind of hanging around, or they're not really doing anything, or they're, you know, causing crime, but they're not getting the opportunity to do something that's actually worthwhile, you know. And I can just say from my own personal experience that if you give, you know, the average person, if you give them an opportunity to make money and care for their family, they're gonna take it, you know. And so I think it's not as complicated as we make it sometimes. It's like you just got to give them a good opportunity, one that's worth investing in, and people will invest in themselves.
Okay, I've got one last question, and I'll ask each of the panelists to take a crack at this one. And I think I can speak on behalf of all of the participants here today. This was a great introduction and overview of this topic, but we all want to learn more. And for the folks like myself who are educators, we want to be able to share this information with our students. So do you have recommendations for other resources, books, videos, films that we can tap into to continue this conversation that we've begun here today?
Oh my gosh, I'll go, and this is so self-serving. But it's a big props to the team that I have the pleasure of working with at Illum. Our team pulls together a magazine every year, and this last year it was entirely focused on sort of this topic of the clean energy transition, and more about sort of citizenship in the context of energy and what that means. And we've also been able to have so many amazing folks speak on webinars and things over the last year. So I can't even believe I'm doing this. I'm totally going to plug that. So if people are interested in it, I'm happy to share, but it's not my work. It's the work of our amazing team. But there is so much good work out there. And I encourage people to really look at and understand, you know, what the folk leading the EJ screen are trying to do to identify, you know, who communities are and how we look at communities, and all those metrics and measures that we need to pay attention to when we're looking at who's going to benefit from this transition and who's not, and why. So that's another place I would encourage people to look. I mean, the list is so long, and I went totally self-serving, so I apologize for that. But our team worked hard, and it is good work. A lot of references in the back too, so it'll take you everywhere you need to go to learn more.
I'm eager to digest it myself. Larry or Ellen, resources to recommend for folks?
We just built a new website, solarenergy.jobs, the Midwest Solar Career Resource Center. And we have all kinds of training opportunities, all the technical college programs who have joined the Solar Corps, lots more to come, an interactive job board, information about career pathways in the solar industry. So that's one place that I would look. You know, same thing, it's self-serving, but our team worked hard, and it's our brand new baby, and it's really coming along nicely. So we're working hard to get the word out to people about how to get trained, how to get educated.
Well, that's a resource I'm quite familiar with, and have looked at it a lot myself and steered a lot of students. So I encourage everybody to check that out. Larry.
Yeah, well, first I'll just say that I will definitely be, if it's okay, emailing you, Sarah and Ellen, just for those connections and just to learn more from you on these topics. But I definitely would send folks to renewableenergypartners.com. That's Jamez Staples' project. So you can hear directly from someone who has done this work. You know, tell them I sent you, of course, but I think, you know, the idea of building a new economy, it sounds so big, but I think the kind of theme I got from this conversation was we all have to take our own little piece. And, I think my piece is trying to, as much as possible, link folks together for these types of conversations. And I'm learning as I go along. But I think that Renewable Energy Partners was probably one of the most inspiring things I've seen. An entrepreneur that comes from that community fighting to make sure his community can be a part of that future. That's beyond inspiring for me.
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I apologize to the participants whose questions we didn't get to, but we've run out of time. I think we could have gone on for another hour or more. I can speak for myself. I really enjoyed this conversation and hope we might have another opportunity to do something like this again in the future. And thanks, of course, to the Wisconsin Energy Institute and Scott and Allison for organizing today's conversation. Maybe I'll turn it back over to Scott for a few final comments.
Yeah, so you can see in the chat, if you have any follow-up questions, you can send that to outreach@energy.wis.edu, and we'll try to direct that to the appropriate panelists. Thank you all for participating in this conversation today. It was really informative and great questions, great discussion all around. And a reminder again, on April 7th, we've got our Solve Climate by 2030 program featuring Lieutenant Governor Barnes. That'll be from 7 to 8:15. And then next month, April 20th at 4:30 during our normal Forward in Energy Forum time slot, we'll be doing a climate solutions workshop. So hope to see you all for those events, and hope